Bienvenue. And may I say, it's sad in one sense for us all to be here today at the end of the sessions we've had, but of course it's not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end. It is a very new horizon that we wish to set out. Now, before I go down that route, I'm very aware that we're late on in the day. There is a kind of absorption point for most people, including me, which is about 20 minutes. So, therefore, I don't think you necessarily want, chapter and verse of everything, but you would like to know, I think, one or two things. But I'm going to ask you some questions. This is the interactive part of these proceedings, about which you and no one else had any warning. This is where you press the red button if you've got one. Because you're the citizenry, the conscience, that we've tried to represent. First question. Is there anybody in the audience who thinks that Israel has committed no violations of international law? Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Actually, it's a question. I'm trying to find out who from Mossad is amongst you. But so that and the people in the boxes are looking very frightened up there. That's the first question. Well, in a sense, having answered it, I am not going to, as it were, go through the summary of findings, which is a document you will be able to receive today. It is a document that you'll be able to see online. It's a summary of all the things we've, in a sense, achieved in the 4 sessions on the legal front, legal aspects, legal violations, and so forth, and the various bodies concerned, whether it's the European Union, United Nations, multinationals, and so on. So it's all set out there. But as you are therefore so receptive so far, I think the document will be of interest and support to you when you leave here. It's something you carry with you, not literally perhaps, but mentally. So that's the first question. And I'm most relieved because it means I don't have to do that particular task of going through the summary, which you can do in the comfort of your own homes, those of you lucky enough to have them. Second question. Don't worry, there are only 2. The second question is there anybody in the audience who believes there is absolutely nothing that we as citizens can do about it? Right, well, that's the other document I don't have to go through then. There are two major ones. One is the achievements, which is this session, and the other one, which deals with some of the things that we've been able to do. And I'm going to highlight 1 or 2 just to give you an idea of what is possible. Because so often you go to meetings and people come away and they feel, and this is a tribunal that is quasi-judicial, feel that there is nothing that can be done. So these 2 documents, achievements and summary of findings, would you please look at when you have a moment to fill in the detail. Now, what I want to do, just for a second, before getting to what there is to do and how to do it, and it'll link in, it's a precursor to the next session, which Angela's dealing with ways forward. It's hand in glove. Hesitate to say she's the glove and I'm the hand, but that's how it's going to work. It's hand in glove. I just want to broaden it a bit for a moment. I was going to say something about it, interestingly, but somebody just handed me something as I came in. I think we can't sit here, can we, as citizens of the world, as jurists, whatever occupation or interest you have, without being aware of a broader context. This broader context provides a challenge and an opportunity, the like of which hasn't been met for many, many generations. And it bears upon, particularly, those who have to sit day after day, month after month, year after year, like the letter we heard earlier on, enduring injustice of a kind that's almost, well, it's certainly unbearable, but to see somebody rise up against that is inspirational. But for those people particularly who are incarcerated, not just in Palestine, but throughout the world, because of what is happening in the world at this moment. Now, you don't need to be told. I just want to draw the strands together because they should all have hope. What is happening is economic meltdown. You know that, I know that, but we know that there's a level of politicians that plainly know it but can't face up to it and run around like scared rabbits, pretending that some kind of unmanageable deficit will be overcome in the near future if we grow and if we spend and if we don't and so on. You know the austerity issues. But it's serious, make no mistake, brought about by shadow capitalism and so on. You know the issues. But that is one aspect. The second one, which is happening at the same time, is political meltdown. Now, the US, we've heard a lot about, is financially in trouble. They talked about a cliff a bit earlier this year, but they're on very thin ice, as is the United Kingdom, which we've heard less about, perfidious Albion and the way they've behaved over Palestine. But there are peoples in the world who are recognizing that it's time to retake control, not just of the streets, but of the centrality of power of their existence. That's happening. You know where it's happening. It's sometimes been labeled the Arab Spring, but it's much broader than that. And then in addition to that, you have environmental meltdown. 3 meltdowns. The environmental one is equally important. It's not just about climate change. It is about the very forces that are at work in Palestine. Political forces and multinational forces that are desecrating the environment, and in so doing, they are putting people's lives at risk and in prison. Where is this happening? Well, it's happening in some extraordinary places. Canada, of course, one of the nations that voted against in the vote last November. The Cree Nation are under threat from the way in which dirty oil is being extracted. You may think this is a long way from Palestine, but it's not, because we have a member of the First Nations right here, and the connection is very close. And it's the same forces. And I've not said this before, but the reason I'm here is because of my involvement, not just with campaigns within the United Kingdom on behalf of victims and their families who've made a difference. It's taken them generations. In the north of Ireland, Bloody Sunday families took them 30 years to get anywhere near the truth, let alone justice. So this is a very common phenomenon. And the way forward, which we'll learn about later, is paved by people who are prepared to stand up, to persevere, to persist in the need for truth and justice. So Canada's one example. It's happening in Colombia. Other multinationals extracting, mining extracting. If anybody gets in the way, they're shot. Fortunately, there's an organization called PBI, of which I'm a part, and an alliance of lawyers at risk who are prepared to go to South America and stand by those who might risk getting shot. But it isn't just South America. It isn't just South America. South Africa, which Ronnie has written about. South Africa, where miners get shot. And who is at the back of that? It's a British multinational, once again. And it's not just South Africa. The list is fairly endless, and recently, and this is the document I was handed just as I came in, I took action with other lawyers in London to protest at what is happening on our doorsteps. In Europe, In Spain, they're locking up lawyers without due process. Basques. It's in this document I've been handed, but I know all about it because I nearly got arrested outside the Spanish embassy in London. But it isn't just Spain. You know possibly other examples, but I'll give one more, and that's Turkey. They're locking up lawyers there. I'm not here to plead for lawyers. I'm just saying that's the threat. In other words, the forces at work in Palestine, much the same as the forces at work elsewhere, are recognizing the chips are down and that there is action being taken, and there is an interesting correlation and connection. Tony mentioned it, a connection between these various movements and the Palestinians, because they all recognize that what the Palestinians have had to put up with for 60 years, sometimes much longer than they have, is their struggle. It's what I've put in the book, in a sense, a commemorative book for Stefan, that you can obtain. It's in French. That freedom is indivisible. We all have an obligation, and any attack anywhere in the world on anyone's freedom is an attack on us. So the way in which these movements are coordinating is of interest because they're doing it electronically. You don't necessarily have to come to London or Brussels or anywhere else. You can pick up the information very quickly indeed. And of course they're afraid of this. They're afraid in a sense of an electronic intifada. And that's what's happening. This connection being made between these various movements. And an actual expression on the streets, which Stefan himself recognized, of a younger generation, and sometimes an older one, including myself, a much older one, is the Occupy movement. The Occupy movement understood that it was necessary to occupy the high ground, moral high ground, and be out there, not engaging in illegal or unlawful activity, quite the reverse, actually occupying the legal territory and saying, we know. Now that movement still goes on. In the United States of America, in Europe, in the United Kingdom. It's there. And these seeds are seen, undoubtedly by those in power, as a real threat. And I therefore come back to Palestine. I have a singular message. Not just for all of you, because you know the answer to the questions I posed. But I have a singular message for the Israeli authorities and government who, as Ronnie said, will be listening. And the singular message is this. We're entering a new phase at the end of the hearings, the formal hearings. A new phase, and I'm going to, in a sense, declare it as a legal intifada. A legal intifada in which all of you and all of us, whether we're in a formalized body or not, utilize the tools, utilize the international frameworks that are there to bring about change and make a difference, which we know we can do. I'll illustrate how this is in that very short time frame you see up there, really, 2010 to now, barely 3 years. What has happened in one or two ways? And the intifada that I'm talking about is therefore that Israel is going to be faced with challenges, legal challenges on all fronts at all times from all sides. And those who are imprisoned in Palestine should know that we're out there to support them, to support the rule of law. Now, I pause for 1 second. What happened this week 10 years ago? I think you will all remember. Yeah, the invasion of Iraq. One of the most unlawful acts, and there's a consensus internationally. I'm not entering into the debate other than to say there is a consensus, including on this occasion, the UN Secretary General It is an irony, isn't it, that a warmonger, a war criminal like Tony Blair, is actually sent as an emissary to the Middle East to sort out the road to peace. I don't think so. So, now I know you're not supposed to clap. Archbishop Tutu did this when Pierre was going like that. So, I don't want to undermine authority much. However, I think that the force which we've seen in these circumstances in which people are, as it were, rising up to challenge individually the various places, and the Iraq War was a very fine example. I just give it so it shows what's possible. Eventually, in the United Kingdom, a public inquiry was set up, much against Mr. Blair's desires. He opposed it because he knew the game would be up. We're waiting for the results of that inquiry, which has been put off now for nearly 2 years because the present government or somebody is refusing disclosure, either of the results or of certain documents that are relevant to it. And the pressure to get all of that wasn't because the system said we can change, we can do something. It was because people like you in the United Kingdom said we want change, we want accountability, we want truth. And Blair was most uncomfortable having to give evidence in public, on television, creeping in through a back entrance. Very significant. Now, in relation to Palestine, a very similar movement has happened. Now, there are two main arms, if you like, to the movement that the tribunal have attempted to highlight. One, if you like, is the civil arm, the civil remedies, the legal actions that can be taken against companies, the multinationals. You've heard some of the names: G4S, Veolia, Caterpillar, Ahava. You know them all. But it's empowering people to uphold the rule of law in order to ensure disengagement in illegal activities in Israel-Palestine. But it goes beyond legal actions. It goes towards political and economic pressure. It's estimated in billions of pounds the company's loss of having to withdraw from their contracts. So it's hurting the companies. And believe you me, at the end of the day, it hurts Israel, because Israel, as we've heard yesterday in the debate that Mairead mentioned, is bankrolled by the United States. So the economic boycott, the BDS movement, going long before the Russell Tribunal was set up, but nevertheless, we hope we've provided reinvigoration. And certainly last year I went to Sweden on a tour on behalf of Russell, indicating what we'd found, indicating what was possible, and the newsletters that come from Sweden and elsewhere in the world about the boycotts and the effect of it, the cultural boycotts as well, are beginning to take hold. That's one, the civil, if you like, angle, the civil arm. There's another one, which obviously as a criminal lawyer is very close to my heart. That's the criminal one, the criminal arena. Now, I was going to read, but I'm not going to do it because it'll break the momentum. I carry everywhere a copy of the advisory opinion of the World Court. It's called the World Court, in short, the International Court of Justice. And we need to go back to this document. And of course, I appreciate in practice the US, the Quartet and all the rest of it have tried to kill it off. But juridically, this document still stands. No one has said that the opinion itself was not meritorious, was not based on principle. And in fact, it is the very origins of this tribunal. That's why we're here. Because In 1966 in the Vietnam War, it was a different situation. Then there wasn't a permanent court set up in 2002, or came into force in 2002, and there was barely a recognition that the United States was committing war crimes. So they had a task of actually raising public awareness that there were war crimes being committed. We had a different task. Our task was to ensure that everybody continued to recognize that the crimes were being committed. But the question on everybody's lips was, well, the instruments are there. Why is nothing happening? That was the vacuum into which we had to step. And when you read the judgment, you will see, not only does it say very clearly the violations that Israel has committed, just by the wall, never mind everything else, and its effect on settlements and so on. It's not just saying it's illegal, it's going much further than any court has said before. And it has a bearing on you sitting right there now. Because what the World Court said was, not only has Israel got an obligation to stop, which of course it hasn't, whether it's settlements or the wall, but the rest of the world, it was put in terms of states. It calls it a principle called erga omnes, which means really there's an obligation on everybody because these violations are so fundamental, so serious, so crucial to the rule of law, that we all have an obligation to ensure they're kept. So the boycott, the civil action, the attempt to get criminal action is very much part of an exhortation that has come from an extremely prestigious court with 14 out of 15 judges supporting this particular approach. So what you're doing isn't illegal because, of course, Israelis and their supporters, the Israeli government and their supporters, will say that what is happening isn't authorized, isn't legal. And I've had that complaint to be met many, many times. But actually, at the end of the day, if you read the judgment, the authorization for the dismantling of apartheid is there. So you don't need to look further. You don't need to feel embarrassed. You don't need to feel defensive. You have the moral high ground. It's quite clearly there. And of course, it comes back to enforcing the rule of law. And I just want to trace one thing that happened. I'll do it very quickly because you heard a lot about it. Cape Town, plainly, and this is the impact we've had. It started with that Goldstone article in the New York Times. So we knew they were watching. We knew they were worried about this. Goldstone letter, Haneen Zoabi threatened the moment she leaves the witness box. And then something you may not know if you weren't in South Africa at the time. Something quite remarkable happened to the live stream that was going out worldwide, broadcasting what we were doing. It was hacked into and closed down, only for a short time, but very professionally and in a very sophisticated way. Who on earth would like to do that? Well, you've got the answer to that question as well. But it didn't stop there, obviously. That's Cape Town. After Cape Town, we did something that actually at one stage I think many thought was probably not worth it. It's not quite in the same league as the speech that has been talked about in South Africa that changed apartheid, but it's close. We went to Geneva on behalf of the Russell Tribunal and others, obviously, to say to the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and Israel signed up to that convention. Of course, they did so on the basis of, getting rid of anti-Semitism, which is equally evil, of course. But having signed up to it, they have an obligation to go. And they do go, and they did go this time last year. John Dugard wrote a very detailed paper about apartheid and its definition, which is very, very broad. It's not limited to the model in South Africa. It's much broader than that. Not just in Palestine, but in Israel as well, which was Haneen Zoabi's point in Cape Town. And what was very interesting in this committee was that it was alerted in a way that it hadn't been alerted before. Of course, it knew about various difficulties in Israel-Palestine, But what it needed was to be told that actually, let's stop tiddling with detail. The real overarching picture, which you as a committee of the UN have an obligation to ensure under the conventions is eradicated, is apartheid. And it did provoke extraordinary discussion on the spot. I did the presentation orally. And we were approached individually. And the report, which I was going to read, but I won't, I would ask you to read it. It's called CERD, these acronyms, but anyway, not absurd, but CERD. The CERD report is magnificent because for the first time, in an unprecedented manner, they finally decided they had to face up to the truth. And all power to their elbow that they did, and what they did was to say, basically, you, Israel, under the Article 3 of the Convention, have to stop the practices of apartheid. Now, Israel is very sensitive about that. And, of course, not only are they sensitive, they were there to hear all this. Sometimes they just pretend to ignore, but they were there. And once that hurdle had been breached, as it were, or overcome, the sequence of events last year was very important. We go to New York and we address a committee of the United Nations General Assembly. Very important for the Israeli government to recognize that we're there, that we're having a hearing on your behalf, and we're putting over a message, the same message, in a sense, that we put over to CERD was put over to the committee, who perhaps don't get addressed in these forceful terms normally, suddenly realized, actually, of course, there was an obligation. As John has said, there's an obligation on the United Nations to do what they have not done, and essentially they've colluded with illegality. The committee said they were very impressed. The committee said that this was going to be the start. I like to think, and I do believe, it's a small brick in the wall, but every brick is a small one, and eventually you get the wall. Well, Roger will know that. Well, Roger went himself to the United Nations. I think it was the same committee, but in any event, on the day of the vote, made a remarkable speech, inimitable style, no music. And you can see it online. But again, on behalf of the Russell Tribunal, the day on which I will proclaim, if no one else, or if others are a little bit reluctant to overemphasize it, this was an overwhelming vote of 138 out of 193, and the nations who voted against, of course, the US and some of its territories, principally Czech Republic and Canada, and a lot of abstentions. Well, of course, the UK, guess what, the UK? You know, it's a bit like a perfidious white butterfly. First they're over here, then they're over there, and then they're nowhere. Well, actually, they're on the wall. They're sitting on the wall, which is what they did. They had the audacity, my government had the audacity to say to the Palestinians and others, well, we'll support, of course they do it behind the scenes, we'll support you as long as you don't go to the ICC. Think about that. You get murdered on the streets, well, we'll support you to get the truth as long as you don't go to court about it. I mean, it's ludicrous. It's outrageous that they should do that, but they tried to do that. But they decided, as I've said, with 40 others to abstain. But that was a milestone because it provides an opportunity for the prosecutor at the ICC to review the decisions that he's been so far stalling on because, well, she now, stalling on because we can't work out whether Palestine's a state. Well, they can now. It's been presented to them on a plate, and I've got 2 minutes. Right. I'm going to turn that over and make it 102. No, it's all right. And so that vote is historic. It gives the Palestinian Authority, and I appreciate that they may feel disempowered. They may feel demoralized. They may feel that they too are beholden to the United States. Oh, no, they're not. And we want to reinvigorate the Palestinian Authority as well to say, this was the one thing Israel did not want. This is the one thing that's now in place. And if you, the Palestinian Authority, do not use the opportunity to go to the court and essentially put Israel on trial for all those things that are mapped out in our various documents, then it is a betrayal. And so therefore we say in no uncertain terms, here we go, Intifada, legal. Thank you.